XAnalysts. Empowering analysts, transforming markets.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to yet another episode of Exploring the Energy Markets. What a year start for 2026. And I have a very special guest today, Sean. No one better than him, who is the podcaster in chief in my eyes, who just organized the marathon of all the global analysts together on 8th of January. Sean, welcome. And I would say that we should call 8th of January the World Analysis Day. Welcome, Sean.
Well, certainly, if it comes with a holiday, it has to come with a rather than the busiest day of the year. But Mukesh, thank you. Lovely to be with you. Greetings from Dubai to Sydney.
Thank you, Sean. We have quite some things to talk about, Sean. And let me just give a framework to you. We'll talk about what's really hot in the market, and there is no shortage of it. So I'm going to ask you your takes on some of the top items. But the core focus of the podcast is not just to get your views, but how do you build your views? You work with, I believe, the widest variety of analysts across the globe, from the age, from region, from language, right? And you are right in the middle of the world. So I would like to ask also, what really inspires you among the analysts? What really annoys you? And what do you see as a high quality analysis? Because the bottom line for my podcast, Sean, is to really inspire the young analysts and to generate high quality analysis. And that leads to high quality debate and high quality decisions. Of course, there will be some surprise questions, Sean, so be prepared. But first, I want to ask you, share a little bit what people don't know, something interesting about your journey in the energy markets.
Well, I suppose the interesting, I mean, I know it's interesting, but my journey to the energy markets. I mean, the energy markets to me is a sort of, obviously it's an identifying brand, if you like, in the sense of it tells you it's a window. It's what you might see on the name on the window, on the shop window. But ultimately, the energy markets is a gateway into a whole universe of tangential narratives and geopolitical issues and macroeconomic realities and microeconomic dynamics, whether you choose to drive a sort of combustion engine car or an EV car on the micro level. The energy markets are where the whole world intersects. It is the nexus of Venn diagrams, and so for me as a young boy, son of a United Nations field officer who spent his career setting up UN missions around the Middle East and then into the terrible challenges that Europe faced in the 90s. And my dad was responsible for the UN missions in Bosnia and in a lot of the places, Kosovo and so forth. My young life was molded by the intersection of where a lot of issues come to the surface, where a lot of issues collide and need sorting out, if you like. And so that was bedded into me quite early and has been my sort of North Star for, far too many years to mention. I did navigate through college, political science and international relations at economics, which then took me on a kind of a journey of a decade after college, which took me into law school and into the theater at the same time. This pursuit of sort of understanding the world and how it's connected and expressing the issues and surfacing the issues that needed to be expressed. I was sort of down the corridor of law and its very sort of narrow, tightly engineered framework, and then the theater, which was the opposite, similarly framework of expression. And out of both of those two journeys, when the law school ended and 3 or 4 years into professional theater, they both led to journalism. They both led to a sort of a kind of a middle ground of platform in which I found to be the sort of perfectly aligned with my interests and my sort of historical personal journey and the pathway forward. And journalism led to the discovery of so many issues and so many topics. I've ended up being the Financial Times correspondent in Cairo, which led me to the Middle East region. And of course, the big narratives in the Middle East are where geopolitics and energy intersect and have done so for 50 years. And that's how I ended up knocking on the energy market's door.
Fantastic, Sean. I will want to dig deeper about the mission with which you are with the Gulf Intelligence a little later. But I think fascinating story from the UN missions to law, to theater, to energy markets, financial markets, and law. And I think you are in the right region. Well, you use the word tangents in the market and the theater. I think the year has started in a very dramatic way, 2026. So, Sean, what top three things come to your mind outside the noise, which you have, speaking with analysts, as the key defining things that will shape 2026?
Well, I think it's nearly a rear view mirror at this stage, although I did post like the 1st of January, New Year's sort of resolution that this
the unknowns, the
unknown, the unknown unknowns, the infamous quote by Donald Rumsfeld through the tragic days of the U.S. invasion of Iraq in 2003. But a year in which the unprecedented, the unknowns that what you don't know, you don't know. I mean, the sort of known unknowns, the idea that the U.S. had already built up an armada around Venezuela over the last few weeks of 2025. But the unknown was that they would actually go in and arrest the sitting president of a major country, sitting on the world's largest oil reserves, and literally handcuff him and take him to a court in New York and make him sit in Rikers Island prison where he sits today. That's really an unknown unknown. I mean, this is sort of changing the behavior of what was previously done. In my years traveling through Central America and South America, the pleasure after I graduated from college to jump on a motorbike from San Francisco and drove all the way through Central America to Colombia over 6 months during the 1980s, when the U.S. were heavily involved in manipulating all of the governments. And at that time in the Cold War, the face-off with the Soviets and the communists and all of that stuff. But everything was done behind, fog, smoke, and mirrors. You remember Oliver North and the Iran-Contra deal and all of this stuff. It was all mercurial back office. You never saw it happening. And everybody obviously reported on it. But here you had, in this era, everything so front and center in your face.
Yeah, no gloves.
No gloves and no subtlety and no space for an exit off ramp, if you like. And so the year of the unknown unknowns, and we're 2 weeks into it, the arrest of the Venezuelan president, the sort of idea of invading Greenland, a part of Europe, a NATO member, it's so off the charts. We had always sort of, again, the known unknown was, and others behind him in earlier presidencies expressed the keen strategic placement of Greenland. But the idea that an American president would actually articulate the words that he will, do what's necessary by force or otherwise to take a very big integral part of a European country is just kind of...
Military is probably what you're saying, Sean, is U.S. military actions in Greenland or maybe some other parts of the world could be the unknown, which we don't know.
Well, it's certainly the idea that the U.S. is perhaps about to take military action again, the second time within a year, on Iran. These are kind of known unknowns. They follow a particular historical narrative in which global institutions and architecture are prepared for. The DNA is kind of there to navigate that. but an invasion or using the brute force of the U.S. Machine to capture without cooperation a piece of Europe and a fellow NATO country just blows up literally every framework of the last 80
That's
years.
around there, yeah.
And that unknown is so great that once you push that domino over, you really don't know what's coming. Never mind, you're going to arrest the Federal Reserve chairman at the same week. So this is really early days in a very disrupting year, which I think the institutions of government and markets are a frog being boiled in water right now. The markets are barely reacting, and they're just become desensitized, not wise, I'd say desensitized to greed and unable to navigate, unknown unknowns because they don't have any reference.
So in that space, Sean, now I think you painted the picture very well. That's the state of the market and the world we are in. Maybe let me fire some rapid fires because there's so much to talk and there's so much you can share. Quick takes on what happens next in Venezuela. Do you see further collapse or Venezuela with US? Technically, US has joined OPEC because Venezuela is part of the OPEC in some ways. So you see Venezuela growing production or falling apart? What's your take?
I certainly think the narrative over the arc of time is that, production can't fall anymore, right? It's literally been at the bottom of the barrel, so to speak, for some time. So the only way is up from a purely oil production point of view. When I was running around as a young journalist chasing ministers around the world in the 90s, Venezuela was producing over 3 million barrels of oil a day. With the right investment and the right sort of political structures, there's no reason why over the next 5 to 10 years it doesn't get back to that. It's very difficult to make argument with the right finances and the right politics that it gets back to its cruising altitude.
Mm-hmm. Iran, I think, is hard to call, but still I would ask, Sean, what's your quick take? Big action in Iran or let it implode from inside? Because my thought is that Iran may not have the nuclear, but Iran certainly has the Strait of Hormuz, which is almost like a nuclear button, and that may prevent US from taking big action. But your take?
Listen, I think there's a lot that you could say. The dominoes that were pushed over in last June when Israel and the United States both bombed quite dramatically, quite substantially, the military infrastructure of Iran, obviously weakening the regime and the ability of that government and leadership to sort of continue to defend itself after wiping out, or certainly weakening dramatically, all of its proxies in the region. So the Iranian government, that has been in power since 1979, the leadership of the religious Islamic leadership, the Islamic Revolution, has been on a very weakening wicket, as they say in cricket, over some time. I think where wisdom may or may not be at this moment is obviously very difficult to identify in the greater scheme of things, the two protagonists, and most notably Israel and the United States. But I would say that if there's wiser minds at play here in Washington, that they realize that if there is to be a future of cooperation with Iran, it's really very important that the Iranian people find their destination to the new dawn, rather than it be perceived as handed on a plate from the CIA. Otherwise, it just lays the seeds for the next big problem. And of course, that has been a cycle for over 60, 70 years.
No, I think you're right. And I see some parallel thread in what you just mentioned, Sean, that even in Venezuela, they took the person out. They didn't go the existing system collapse. The existing system is functioning. They will, let's say, adapt the existing system to their advantage. So I guess something like that, Iran. Okay, quick takes on Ukraine, Russia. Do we see peace this year? Any calls by when? Or this is almost like more than maybe a world war, right? Period. So is it time for end coming soon, or you still see it's going continuous?
Listen, my big take on a lot of these different elements are the way that they are sort of attached, if you want.
Yeah, intertwined. Yeah.
And I think Ukraine, the Russia's invasion of Ukraine, maybe wasn't intended to be the first shot of the global face-off between China and the United States, but I think it has evolved into being so, and that is so the idea that Russia has become so overtly dependent on China. It is basically its protector, its only market for its gas, a significant market for its oil, its status and platform in the world. It is so overtly dependent on China. And I just can't identify why China would ever allow Russia to stop the war in Ukraine. It seems to me that it serves China, in this world where the US is trying to get China shut it out of Venezuela and out of Latin America. Obviously, all of the tariffs we saw in the last year and in government. But it seems to me that China, it's very difficult for the conflict in Ukraine to be resolved without China giving its blessing to Russia to now you can wrap it up. But until China gets what it wants from the United States globally, I don't think it signs off on a wrap up of the Ukraine war, because it just serves their interest perfectly to keep the European and the Western alliance bogged down in a low grade but significant conflict that keeps them unstable while China is got to deal with so many other things. So until China waves the flag, I don't think Russia gets to negotiate a deal there. And I don't see that happening. Now, there's some very big meetings, perhaps after those meetings, if indeed there is some grand bargain to divide up the world, you give me Latin America, I'll give you Taiwan, and some big kind of 19th century type of carve up. Then once that's done, okay, Russia, halas, you can wrap up now in Ukraine.
Very fascinating, point, Sean, and I think this is stimulating. I didn't think like that, and I'm sure many. So essentially, it's kind of the Western Hemisphere, and China gets the Eastern Hemisphere. I'm learning that despite all the tariffs, China's trade surplus is the highest, because probably it got access to a huge country like Russia for some of its output and products. So you're right. US got Europe as its captive short for energy. China got Russia, and I think till US and so I think to me it's all about US and China, whether it is Venezuela, whether it is Russia, Iran, it's all connected. Because it is so connected, Sean, I wanted to ask you, it's hard to make a call on these tough tangential topics. You speak with a lot of analysts across the globe. How do you see, what do you really admire? I want to shift a little bit gears and understand, how do you really build a view, and what kind of approaches, methods you have seen, which you find really good, so that we can make good views about such an, kind of an unknown and a complex market?
Well, I think it's important. I mean, from my point of view, and as I articulated my own journey, I come to this world and I come to the pathway of my engagement. I mean, as a editorial person, a lawyer, a trained, studied legal person in terms of the discipline of our framing an argument or framing a stacking research on top of each other. But like a lawyer, like a journalist, I don't claim to be the originator of data. I don't, but I do aggregate and convene, and obviously with a long journey of experience in to multiple different of the tangents and the parallel corridors that influence the energy markets, I have had the opportunity to be both very engaged on the last mile of connectivity when I was a young journalist, literally being in covering war environments where bombs were dropping, where the regional sort of geopolitical sort of glacier kind of collisions were happening in real time. As a young child, as my father was faced with the daily challenges of anchoring UN Security Council resolutions on the ground. It's one thing for them to be passed in New York, but how do 100 UN civil servants working on the streets of Yemen or Beirut actually bring this 500-word resolution to meaning
to the ground,
with the stakeholders on the ground? And that kind of sort of journey of mine and exposure has allowed me to, and has given my lifelong interest to be in endless conversations. I mean, I am, I suppose, in some ways, a classic Irishman. I love the chat. I love the opportunity to sit around whatever proverbial fire and have talk all of the angles, and like a lawyer, not be prejudicial against any particular angle, and then in the absorption of all of that, find truth. And my day begins every day, 4:35 a.m., reading newspapers and news sources from literally the four corners of the world. And before 6 o'clock, I probably dipped into at least 30 newspapers or 30 news sources. And doing that every day for many years, inevitably percolates into some kind of universal kind of understanding and viewpoint.
No, thank you, Sean. I think what I pick up, and I'm sure people, would be fascinated, be and inspired. That's the whole point of XAnalysts, is to inspire. I think learn history. I think that's the message once coming out. Be like a lawyer, like an editorial person. Don't be biased one way or the other. Don't go with the loudest view. And I've seen that you moderate some of the loudest voices sometimes, and you do it very well, Sean. And also, as you mentioned, that the chat, like connect with the people in the market. That's where the stories are. So I think that's where I think the high quality analysis will come.
When I was leading Bloomberg News and Television, the Middle East news gathering of that organization for a number of years, I had to, you had to sort of nearly force journalists to get out of the office and get on the ground to get the last mile of connectivity, insights, and news ultimately, because what has happened in the world in the journey of from sort of analog and newspaper into digital and online and real time and perpetual content flow is that you're so busy just filtering the flow that's coming at you, whether it be daily stock market feeds or news, multiple, Fortune 500 publicly traded companies. Every one of them publishes at least 5 to 10 press releases every day. It's just a constant sort of barrage of content coming at editorial people.
So don't lose the touch of getting it out there.
Oh, you've got to get out on the street, and you got to get that last mile of connectivity. And that's why I've stayed in the Middle East for this region for so long, because the last mile of connectivity is really the most interesting one. It's where all of the knots get tied, and to understand that and to be exposed to it is very, very useful.
Now, I think I will write this down on my desk, the last mile of connectivity. This is probably one of the beautiful ways you have summarized quite a lot of good thoughts in a simple sentence.
And that's what good journalists have done for 100 years and continue to do, and bad journalists just sit at their desk and let the waterfall come on top of them.
Correct. Well, Sean, what annoys you? I know you speak to a lot of analysts. You always want to ask, what's your view? Tell me the view and not go beat around the bush. What really is a message? What annoys you to some budding analysts or some gray hair analysts? What's the hard message you want to give?
Well, I think it's something I just articulated, but it is quite pronounced today, and I think it's one of the thing I sort of half joke about recently, as we're kind of kids of the 1980s, if you want. I went to college in the 80s, and sort of it's my sort of cultural reference point as such, but. We lived our journey as the career journey, if you like, starting out writing everything on notepads and typewriters, and then the desktop computers came into our lives, and the journey went on from where we are today. But ultimately, the fundamentals that have not changed is sitting down and face to face. You can looking people in the eye. That last mile of connectivity, as I said, you got to get out. People is still the as it was with our Stone Age ancestors, as it is today. It's still really the value space. At least it is to me. And I think for analysts to really have something differentiator, the idea that. You can somehow coexist with AI or with all of the technical tools. If you don't have some unique on the ground personal engagement, real intelligence, physical environment, connectivity, if you want to be an equity analyst, sort of trading on different markets, but in terms of the energy markets, the physical energy markets in particular, that connectivity, that granular, technical, the idea we used to have, and I say to people whenever they come to Dubai, you're down on the street here, it sort of feels like the busiest place on the planet. When you get up in a helicopter and you fly over the city, you realize, oh my goodness, how empty it is. There's so much empty space in Dubai, and yet on the ground it feels like you're living in a very busy place. So context and perspective is so critical.
Is the key.
And so for analysts to get on the ground, get into places, get into the markets where they are, the physical environments that they're covering. It's no different than editorial, and I do believe that while so much has changed in the world, is changing every day, it's also so much is not changing. That there's still the tools are evolving and changing and rapidly changing at times, but ultimately the granular engagement of dialogue, of knowledge gathering, of intelligence, of all of these things, the unique perspective on how to sort of distill all of that content. Without context, it's meaningless, really.
No, I think, especially I would say, Sean, you're so right. In the age of AI, when you can solve the data problems faster than before, you do need higher context to talk to people, especially for the younger folks. And the best way to get that is to talk to the people who have been long enough around.
And I think, increasingly from the point of view of analysts or otherwise, is given the AI universe, and everything. And it's not AI is the latest and somewhat of an accelerator, obviously, and we still are very much sort of we're in the middle of the house burning down, and we don't quite know what's the outcome. But ultimately, we've been, as I said, in our career and our professional life, there's been a lot of massive technical advancements in the tools that we would use, but the ultimate sense of what do you study, what is your academic journey, and the interesting thing that's despite the fact that there's endless content and these tools have brought so much knowledge, people seem stupider than they've ever been, and are not processing that content and that knowledge, are able to absorb it. And I think from an academic pursuit point of view, I would encourage or urge people to get back to the classics, or whatever are the classics of Indian culture, or the classics of Western civilization, and Plato, and all, for 1,000 years.
Go to the roots.
For 1,000 years, Oxbridge, which is still amongst the top, at least ranked university academic institutions in the world, all they studied was the classics. I know it was the privilege of landed gentry, and it was a very aristocratic architecture of privilege around that. But ultimately, knowledge, and then the 20th century, all these ideas of business and all sorts of crazy subjects came into study. But the classics give you a sense of ability to absorb knowledge through your life, rather than any particular skill.
Sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah.
Any stories in your experience which are worth sharing, where you really found that people, when they didn't pay attention, they got it so wrong? Any things you have seen people getting so wrong? Any stories?
Well, I mean, that's obviously a very long piece of string, but you think of the recent, I mean, not recent, but it stands out as quite significant, as we were talking about it earlier. Russia had lined up over 100,000 soldiers on the border of Ukraine in the months before the invasion in February 2022, which is now sadly coming up to a 4th-year anniversary. And people were still saying, "Oh no, it's just a game. It's just a war game. It's just a intimidation. It's da, 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 da." Meanwhile, the Russian government, and under the era of President Putin, has smashed Chechnya to dust, has invaded Georgia, has done so many record of physical force. And there's a number of analysts and editorial and political leaders, etc., who didn't even, when it was literally the butt of the gun was banging on the door of Ukraine. Oh no!
So it's the bias.
It's are so bedded into their DNA that are bedded into a set of narratives and biases that it's and the world is changing so much. The whole architecture has a great difficulty in being able to process and see something other than what their sort of preconceived biases lead them to believe.
And I think you make an excellent point. If you ask me, this may be the most important takeaway for a lot of analysts, is because the outcome is so difficult to comprehend, don't stop analyzing it, right? And only try to analyze what is possible in your mind, but really, see the signs and go, even if it is very uncomfortable, against your bias. I think that's a very powerful. And I'm sure China's in Taiwan, Greenland, and which one is the 51st state of the US. I think these are all possibilities. So don't get ahead, but don't miss the signals because of the bias. I think that's what you're pointing out. Sean, I think this is such a valuable, session in my mind. Sean, you talked about really how to think about the markets. As you said, it's complex markets and so much of known unknowns, and especially your example and the story around how analysts didn't see the Russia situation, Ukraine coming. You are in the region where OPEC is. I have watched OPEC for quite some years now. I always visualize that they are the stabilizing force in the world by gaining strength both in the crude side, which they had, but downstream side, they have been using the crude side and the product side in really stabilizing the market. Otherwise, in such a geopolitically hot world, how can the oil price, I call it the sticky 60s, right? It stays there. What's your view on path ahead for OPEC in 2026? How are they continue to play that role, or you see some big shifts coming in 2026?
Listen, I have always been of the view, which is not necessarily of this moment that it has emerged, but it's one that many years ago I was kind of I came exposed to it through your former boss, actually, Sir Mark Moody Stewart, who, I had the privilege of interviewing him a few times in my editorial journey when he was both the head of Shell and then was on the board of Aramco for many years. And he used to always say that at some point in time, the lowest cost producer would have to step forward and, may the best man or woman win, pump, drill baby drill, or pump, whatever the very sensible, sober way Sir Mark Moody Stewart would say that. Even when he was, on the board of Aramco, he used to say that at some point, this maximization of revenue will no longer include curtailing supply. It will have to be, you maximize revenue through your ultimate ace card, which is your lowest cost producer. And I think that era has arrived. I don't think it's a one moment to the next, but I do think we've entered the era where the lowest cost producer is emerging as the strategy, that the maximum revenue strategy for the OPEC and for the oil producers, whether they're in OPEC or OPEC plus, or I mean, those that are not are obviously already in the land of, maximum revenue means maximum production. But so I think within the OPEC universe, that we're now have entered that corridor of the low cost producer, maximum revenue being drawn from maximum production strategy, and I think that is where OPEC will go. Does OPEC stay meaningful in that era as you go deeper into it? Does OPEC become a different architecture of relevance other than it being a coordinator of supply restraint or supply release cuts or increases? But, it's what is BRICS? BRICS today is something emerging. It doesn't really have any legal tenure as such, but ultimately it is growing into potentially an influential structure. OPEC could still have a purpose as a coordinator in a maximum revenue world where maximum production is the strategy. But I do think we've entered an era and a time where the historical road that OPEC was created for and was following, i.e. maximum revenue by balancing the market, is profoundly changed. And I think Mark Moody Stewart was right when he said that day would arrive. I think it has arrived. It's not a one day to the next change, but I think the change is underway, and OPEC coexisting in that changed place. I think it's hard to see what that would look like, why OPEC would continue to exist, but it might find a different reason. These group of countries can find value in cooperating that may have, not much to do with oil production, but it could do with, support and other reasons. But I do think the framework has changed, and maximum revenue now means maximum production.
Thank you, Sean. I think the history, again, you proved that knowing long history, you can go back and pull out of your hat references to people, which a lot of that's where the power of analysis comes. My thought is that OPEC will probably become true OPEC. It starts with oil, not just crude. And downstream, the refining side, the petrochemical side, they do not have the footprint just in the Middle East, but they have built huge footprint in China and other countries. So I believe the real crude and products together, which is the oil, is what they will manage, and not just the crude. And I really, from a distance, admire the stability they can still create. Of course, they have to balance the budgets, which are not balancing in my view. But I think the stability of the oil prices is a good thing, and that was probably OPEC might continue. There are so many agencies which are data providers, right? Yes, we have the AI, but AI has to run on high quality data. And I believe the opaqueness in the market has actually increased with the distortions on tariffs and sanctions and switching off the transponders, whether it is the EIA losing the staff, whether Russia stops publishing the data. We also see data not available from many other countries. And then you have the agencies like the OPEC, the EIA, and all the other, what's your sum total feel, or that is something important that is not happening in the field of analysis by these major agencies or players in the market?
I mean, there's so many things missing, but I think on so many levels, the biggest concern I have when it comes to data ultimately is trust.
Trust.
And in particular, I mean, we live, if you take a kind of concentric circles around the U.S. market, and you go out and out, that, you know, obviously Europe and the other elements in the other geographies, but ultimately the other sort of, as you go away from the OECD architecture, the history and the culture of data purification, data gathering, data certification, transparency is a fairly new concept and is still in its infancy in most places, right? There's a sense of acceleration now because of the, you know, at the end of the day, AI, which is the new bionic tool, only, you know, it's like a big cookie monster of you know, Sesame Street cookie monster can only eat cookies, right? Well, Cookie Monster and AI can only eat, you know, clean data, and otherwise it's going to give you poisonous answers. So everybody's rushing to get some kind of a data clarity and a data architecture and gathering and certification process in play. But it's so infant. I mean, people talk about AI will, you know, will struggle to get to the destination and valuation of NVIDIA and Oracle and all of these companies because of the challenge of energy supply to meet all of the data farms requirement. But there is the idea that one can build a data architecture to be pure and clean and perfect for that space is, I think, a massive journey, and particularly now, where the irony of all ironies is that the implosion of trust in the gold standard of the U.S. data statistics architecture, you know, that people are still, they only know one system. Like, it's like the idea of trusting the American government and trusting all of the different channels of research and data, like the CPI inflation number came out at 2.675 this week, and the market is all built around having to believe that is true, and yet we're seeing the gatekeeper of that channel of data and statistics now being a very unreliable individual who wants to fire the Fed chairman. He wants the next guy or girl to do exactly what he says with rates, regardless of what data says. Any series of bad data, he's firing statistics officers. So the center of the gold standard of data and transparency and the meticulous, tedious process of certifying and the accuracy and reliability of particularly market-related data, a space that is increasingly problematic, trust in the data universe in a moment when AI is surfacing to be the bionic tool. Somehow those two things are in collision.
So with that, Sean, I want to, you know, two more things to kind of explore with you. One, what's your vision? I think you've been in the Gulf intelligence consulting, and you've been, you know, really serving the world by giving voice to a lot of analysts. I'm certainly one of them. And, you know, my mission with the XAnalysts, as you can see behind, is a bow and arrow philosophy. And you are, in some ways, my bow, who has given me and many other people a bit of what's your vision going forward. My vision is our agenda is only pure analyst intelligence, not just AI. What's your vision ahead with Gulf intelligence?
Well, Gulf intelligence is now, I was just reminded the other day when LinkedIn reminded me that I've been with Gulf intelligence for 16 years. And I was like, oh, wow. So last time I thought about it, it was 15,
wow.
15 years. So and in that period of time, we've sort of reinvented ourselves a few times because when things change, you have to adapt. And the oil market collapse in 2015-16 was a huge macro event for this region. A lot of things changed from the point of view of the economic well-being of the region. The obviously COVID changed everything from the point of view of live event convening, and we've done, we used to do a lot of that in terms of the forums and workshops and bringing people together in person to engage in either a problem-solving exercise of a workshop or a kind of a wider macro knowledge exchange of a forum conference and everything in between. Basically overnight, and March 2020, that stopped for about 2 or 3 years, and so we had to totally reinvent ourselves, literally overnight. So Gulf Intelligence is a live entity that has always worked with sort of one continuous North Star through that 16 years. And again, through the 16 years before, on a personal level, in terms of the path that I've walked, is our tagline ultimately is we facilitate knowledge exchange. That's the sort of the mantra that's over our door. It's the moniker on our wall, and we facilitate knowledge exchange is no matter the platform and no matter whether it's the podcast, whether it's the live event conference, the workshop, we are conveners of facilitating the dialogue. And as you said, we're privileged in a fortuitous, serendipitous moment of having to reinvent ourselves after COVID closed everything down. We having been a sort of a live in-person convener, became a global convener of the world's best minds of the energy markets, and now we curate the top 100 energy market analysts in the world as part of our community. And as you said, you're up there near the top of the list. And that facilitation of knowledge exchange between all of them, between all of their networks, because obviously you as one of the 100 and every one of the other members of the 100 each have their own ecosystem and universe of 100 plus more people that they network and engage with, both commercially and from a knowledge gathering point of view. So that idea of continuing to convene and to facilitate knowledge exchange will continue to be our North Star, as it is at the moment. The methodology of that, as that gets anchored into more tangible data-related outcomes. We're about to publish this week, the survey results of the convening of that 100 analysts last week, as you said, at the Global Energy Outlook, both the predictions and the survey results. That gathers a kind of a data universe. In the past, we may not have captured that in that sort of format. X% think this, Y% think that. In the past, we would have published that more as a narrative.
That would be very valuable, Sean. Yeah.
More as a narrative, a longer form opinion piece, or a longer form report, but in this era, we're thinking everything in a bite size, in a visual, in a graphic, and how to convene that and facilitate that knowledge exchange in the bite-sized format, using the same depth of brain power behind it. But ultimately, our North Star remains the same. Gulf Intelligence facilitates knowledge exchange amongst key stakeholders in the energy markets across the world, and of course, particularly in the last mile of connectivity here in the Middle East.
No, I think to me, those words, the last mile of connectivity, you are the bridge, not the Gulf, for the world. And would love to have you sometime back in Sydney in Australia, because you are such a fabulous moderator. And I think there is a lack of high quality analyst debate, Sean. There are so many views on one hand, on second hand, on third hand, and people really don't give the clarity of the answer. So I think moderation, what you do is fabulous.
Well,
So
I always
thank you,
say that
Sean.
if you're watching a moderator, and I'll close on this, how I moderate and how I sort of engage a lot of the things that we do, that a moderator and as a facilitator and as Gulf Intelligence, we never take the microphone down from our mouth. You know, when you are involved in a conversation, and obviously in this case, we are here and I have a standing microphone literally right in front of me as you do. But in a lot of context, you have a microphone that is being held in a physical sense, and use it as a metaphor ultimately, is that whenever we are facilitating knowledge exchange, moderating, we never ask a question and bring the mic down and hold it on our lap. You're always holding the microphone to your mouth so that the dialogue is kinetic, is live, and is interactive and intervening like you would if you're having dinner at home with your extended family. Nobody waits for you to finish your sentence, you know, because it is an eclectic. Any dialogue it should be kinetic.
And that's how you keep honest.
Yes. So always have the mic to your mouth and be ready to interdict whenever somebody takes 2 seconds for a breath, because it's in those brief breaths that the most sort of useful intelligence can be surfaced, if you can grab them, if you see them like a fisherman.
Well, thank you, Sean. Not just your words, your sharing of thoughts in this podcast with me. I've really learned something. I'm more inspired. I didn't know a lot about you. I think your journey, as you shared from your childhood to your college and now 16 years with Gulf Intelligence, I'm sure is inspiring for a lot of people and budding analysts and the gray hairs as well. So wish you all the best. And thank you very much, Sean.
Thank you, Mukesh. Best of luck with XAnalysts and first of many more conversations.
Thank you, Sean.
Empowering analysts, transforming markets.